So, hello everybody. Let's talk of the repair mechanism of the body and whether we should fear germs, inflammation, swelling, and other such phenomena. I'll first introduce myself. I am Gidon Kenar. I am 60 years old, had birthday a few days ago. I'm from Israel, as you may hear in my accent. Formerly worked in high-tech. I changed to study neuropathy when I was fed up with high-tech about 12 years ago. I first met GNM due to cancer in the family. Both my brothers-in-law succumbed to the disease or to the situation of cancer. And when the last one was ill, my sister, his wife, gave me a paper to translate from English to Hebrew. A description of GNM in brief. It was about a page and a half only. And the idea was appealing to me, and I kept it in my mind. So when I finished naturopathy in 2014, I went studying GNM with one of my teachers and then with the other, and again abroad, etc., etc. And a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we established the Israeli Center of GNM with my teacher as associate. And my main focus is education. Also, I'm counseling people. I don't like to think myself as a treating people, but I do counsel people and try to educate them to see their condition as a consequence of what happens in life and to cease fearing so much because there was so much fear. So this is me. But who brought us here? So let's first thank the initiator, the discoverer, Dr. Rike Girdhammer. Thank you for discovering the 5 biological laws of nature and researching GNM almost single-handedly for about half of his life, paying a great personal price, very appreciated, and you brought to the world something that we all thankful. Then I'd like to thank my teacher, Idan Sahar and Amnon Betzalel in Israel, in which are also, as I said, my associate in the small but hopefully flourishing, or nowadays flourishing Israeli Center of GNM. And to other teachers I met around, Elsidor Aleker from Canada, Caroline Merkolin from Austria, Helmut Pilhar from the internet, and Ingmar Merkwart, and other good people who, despite some disputes among them, are all united in the wish to spread the GNM knowledge to all. And last but not least, the global GNM. Thank you, Dr. C.J. Vargas. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, for organizing the first Dr. Hammer birthday event. I hope it will be a tradition from now on and will be recognized in the whole world. And for reminding us the scale at which we also should look and think and walk, the scale of the global whole world. Thank you. I'm going to talk about repair mechanisms. So let's see some questions that I'll try to answer. First, when are repairs needed in the body? Second, what needs to be repaired? What are the repair mechanisms themselves? What repairs the body? Why should we talk about it? Why should we know it? And who needs to know all this? So let's start. I'll start with answering the first question in very brief. looking at the chart of the SBS, the Spatial Biological Program. The name SBS, the acronym SBS, comes from German. I'm not sure I can pronounce it correctly, so I won't try. But it says actually a meaningful spatial biological program. So what is happening in a meaningful spatial biological program? The conflict shock starts with a DHS, and this is what begins a meaningful spatial program, the SBS, as I said, which has two main phases. First, say that the DHS, the conflict shock, is an event that leaves us, surprises us and leaves us with no strategy to deal with it and isolate us, and actually gives us a shock. In our subconscious is felt as a threat to either life or our ability to propagate. In any case, such an event will start a meaningful program, which has two main phases. So the active phase brings upon pathological changes in the body. By saying pathological changes, I mean that tissues are changed from the normal condition and organs start to function differently, in different ways than the normal. The organ affected and the tissue affected, of course. So these changes are aimed at helping the organism to cope with the conflict. So again, the conflict is a threat to the organism. Say a lion chasing a gazelle, and gazelle has a conflict of fear of death. This is a very simple and easy to understand example. These changes take mainly one of two forms in the body. One form starts cell proliferation, that is, cells start to multiply in order to increase function of a tissue, for example, a gland, which in this case, it creates growth or tumor when it lasts too long. In nature life, it mostly won't last too long. It's either resolved or the animal die, but in human, in our environment, it may, and in many cases, last too long. This is when we see tumors because of cell proliferation. The second such reaction, or the second such change that happened, the second type of change, mostly, is cell reduction. Cell reduction meaning that there is necrosis or gangrene or ulcer in the tissue affected. In such a case, an injury is created in the tissue, and there is a wound, either external in the skin or internal in some other tissue in the body. So this is the active phase, and this is when both or one of these reaction to the conflict are taking place. There is some other reaction to conflict that I won't talk about because are not important to our topic, but it's not the only one, it's the main ones. The active phase continues for as long as the conflict is active in the psyche and the mind of the person. And then a person may find a resolution, say for a man who his wife left him for another man. A resolution might be that she comes back after whatever time passed, and then a conflict resolution is achieved and the active phase is finished. The same, he might find another spouse, which also will resolve the conflict. Anyway, in the moment when the conflict is resolved, there is a CL, a conflictolysis, that is, the conflict ceases to be exist, it's dissolved away, and the repair phase starts. The repair phase, all that within this dashed rectangle. The repair phase starts when the conflict is resolved and is aimed at normalizing the affected tissue. So we had changes in tissue, in either cell proliferation or cell reduction, and now we have a resolution to the conflict, and the tissue affected has to be repaired. This is when the repair mechanism goes into action. So the when question is answered, I hope. And what I'm going to tell you about the repair mechanism is actually known to medical doctors, to naturopaths. I learned it when I studied naturopathy, to homeopaths, to chiropractors, and to other practitioners of most other disciplines, I guess. Most are familiar to some extent with the repair mechanisms. Yet, most of us, even alternative practitioners and even GNM practitioners, we refer to them as a problem, which is a problem. We refer to them as a cause of malady and disease, as an error or failure of nature, as a cause of imbalance in the body, as a cause of pain or suffering and death. Although not entirely untrue, these views are missing the point by quite far, and this is an important part on which we are going to talk. Based on Dr. Hammer's discoveries, the 5 biological laws of nature, and my humble understandings, I would like to present a different and encouraging or more encouraging and compassionate view of these mechanisms and what they are, mainly as signs of healing. So, microbe inflammation, edema, body heat, temperature, what we call, and other such mechanisms are the body repair mechanisms, and they repair injured tissue. Microbes' job is to break down dead organic matter. Inflammation is a process removing redundant matter from the body. Edema is a process that aimed on flooding tissue with liquid, and it causes swelling in the body. Fever, what we call body heat or temperature, improve chemical processes, and apparently, as research points out sometimes, it helps controlling microbial activity in the body. The repair mechanism's activity is what recognized as disease or malady or illness in the academic medicine and in the public, as well as in most alternative approaches. So almost everybody thinks that the repair mechanisms are disease. These mechanisms do give us disease, but as a disease, as a sickness, as a malady, this is a view that causes quite a lot of problems. We start with microbes. Contrary to conventional thinking, which consider microbes primarily as enemies or infective or pathogens, etc., GNM identifies that microbes assist in the repair phase. Very important. In tissues where tumor develop during active phase, the first reaction to conflict I mentioned before, It is then broken down in the repair phase by microbes. So as I said, microbes' job is to break down organic matter. In some of the tissue, TB bacteria are the sole or the most abundant worker. Those bacteria multiply but are inactive during the conflict active phase, the phase when the person is still in the conflict and still haven't solved it. In regular medicine, this is identified as latent TB. That is, we see them, these microbes, but they don't do what we think they should do, cause disease. They don't cause anything. So it causes latent TB and it is treated anyway. In the other type of tissue where there is a injury by ulcer or gangrene in the active phase, microbes are involved in repairing this injury. And this is probably done by breaking down the tissue that is redundant during the repair of the injury. So as we can see, the role of microbes in the body, as well as it is in nature, in your compost pile and everywhere we see it, is breaking down dead organic matter. It's not causing disease. It's breaking down dead organic matter in the body as well as out of the body. The microbial activity is controlled by the brain during the entire SBS. This is important to remember. It's never an out of control thing. It is controlled. The microbes are controlled during the entire SBS and probably always controlled by our control mechanism, the brain. Now, this control might be disrupted due to medical intervention and some other habits we have, but medical intervention is quite a bit of culprit here. Inflammation. Its main function is to transport unnecessary things out of the body. So we had microbes breaking down a tumor, for example. The redundant matter that was broken down has to be transported out. This is what inflammation does. Inflammation works mainly with white blood cells, which are the main player. And they do this, they swallow particles, we call it phagocytosis. They actually come to an unwanted or had to be removed particle in the body and they engulf it, open around it and close it. And then they can either kill it or throw it away. White cells also can open gaps between cells in a tissue. So a tissue that was intact, say the intestine, for example, can allow gaps so that things can go through or in between the cells. Another thing that white blood cells do is eliminating waste in the form of pus through the skin, through the gastrointestinal tract, forgive me, through lymph vessel, by breathing, when we're coughing, in many cases eliminating waste, and other such mechanism of removing things out of the body. Now, the inflammatory process deals with repairing an injury that caused by necrosis in the active phase. GNM-wise, or GNM thinking is, to my opinion, that any tissue repair engages inflammation, even if this inflammation isn't identified due to inaccuracy or the weakness of the usual test, CRP, C-reactive protein, for example, or blood sediments are used to test for inflammation, and they are not very, very accurate. And in many cases, there is inflammation that is not identified. Also, as well as microbial activity, inflammation too is a brain-controlled process. It's not an out-of-control mechanism or process or phenomena. This process of inflammation works best in liquid environment. Hence, we have to talk about the liquids. The various chemical processes in the body during inflammation and in general can only happen in liquid environment. I guess most of us understand, and this is the reason our body is full of liquid. Most of it is liquid. Inflammation is the process that requires a lot of energy, and it requires much nutrients and disposal of much waste. Flooding the repaired area allows an efficient nourishment and metabolic waste disposal, as well as support for those chemical processes happening during inflammation and during repairs. Therefore, edema is a deliberate and controlled leakage of serum from the blood vessel, which carries nutrient and required molecules into the surrounding tissue. This fluid is later drained from the intracellular space through the lymphatic system, but back into the bloodstream, and with it, it disposes away much of the waste that the process creates. Edema that lead to excessive swelling. Okay, this is, we of course all know, we all felt this once in our life at least. So edema that leads to excessive swelling can cause pain and pressure on vital organs, so edema might be problematic if it is too excessive. And now we come to the process or the phenomena of fever or body heat. So the discovery of Dr. Hammer was that each basic type of tissue, what we call germ layers, has a certain range of temperature that is beneficial for repairing it. And it seems that the type of microbes that operate in that tissue type are adapted to its body heat range. Hence, it is possible, again, not very sure about this, but research do show in the direction that the increase of body temperature also used to regulate the activity of the desired microbes. The increase in body temperature apparently has also a beneficial effect on the activity of white blood cells, which we talk about it in the inflammation process. Increased fever is also a function managed by the brain. So it's a brain-managed function, and it's not an out-of-control function. I remind this to you all around. Fever itself is not proven to cause any damage, even if very high. So we can, I don't remember the Fahrenheit, the degrees Fahrenheit, but in Celsius, we can go up to 40, say 41, 42 degrees in body heat. And this isn't by itself causing any damage. And the heat doesn't go into the realm of causing damage in most cases without intervention. And also, despite the frightening name, there is no relation between fever and heat convulsions, which happen to children oftentimes, There's no research or proven such a relation between the heat and the convulsions. And we know that convulsions with no heat would actually be diagnosed with other names. So it wouldn't be heat convulsions as it diagnosed with children. It will be or epileptic seizure, for example. Lowering body heat in general interfere with the conduct of the repair phase and should be done moderately as possible. You better first calm the parents, then remove the heat. If you do decide to lower heat, do it moderately. A great way to do it is with some alcohol on the inner part of the elbow, several hundred times. This removes by stroking the hand and with a little bit of alcohol, it removes a lot of heat out. And a child we were doing this to was suddenly getting up and say, I want to play. I don't want to sit here anymore. It was totally numb before. So we went through the first four, and so fatigue, exhaustion, pain. These are result of the tissue repair. They also have their purpose in the repair phase, in the repair process. A great fatigue usually accompanies the repair phase in many cases, and such fatigue might last long time. It might last days and sometimes weeks and even months. And it lasts throughout the repair phase and until it ends. In some cases, there's also pain that might be quite strong. For example, in bone repair, there might be strong pain that will last for a month and a half or so. And the pain can be excruciating. And still, if one knows that it's going to pass, he might avoid taking painkillers in droves. The purpose of the fatigue and pain is to force the organism, the man, the person, and the animal to rest and avoid motion. This rest allows for the body to invest its resources in tissue reparations, as the repair phase is due to do. Minimal movement prevents damage to weakened tissues. So the idea is to minimize the movement of the organism in order to prevent damage. And reduced activity also reduces stressing events in which the organism can encounter in everyday life. So the person that still go to work might go into argument, which is stressful, and these stresses interfere with the course of the repair phase. And in stress, as I'll mention further, stress equals no repair. There is no repair during stress. Wound is formed when tumor is broken down during the repair phase in either internal or external tissues. Most important. Such wound can lead to unexplained bleeding. Some tests can find blood in the stool, for example. Okay, because there is a wound that leaks, as wounds usually do, until they close. Pus is the accumulation of white blood cells and cellular debris which aim at driving residue of decomposed tumors out of the body. Look at the process of what we see in acne. Acne is a small, minimal tumor in the dermis, in the under layer of the skin. And when it is decomposed by microbes, it is then start to be moved through the skin, through the upper layer, through the epidermis, and then it becoming a small wound with a residue of pus, and then it break, and the whole episode is gone. So acne is a great demonstration of this process. So cell proliferation always happens when new tissue covers mending wound. If there is swelling, this oftentimes leads to the diagnosis of cancer, because the doctor sees cell proliferate and he sees swelling, and together for most doctors this gives the idea of this is cancer, this is malignant, etc. The seizure is often part of the repair crisis. It's caused by a sympathetic pulse aimed at draining the repair phase edema from the brain and from the body. We're in this phase of exhaustion and edema, of inflammation and edema, and we have to drive it away. So in the epileptic, what we call epileptic crisis, this edema or this extra liquid are pushed away. And for this, we have a sympathetic pulse that causes also the seizures. Okay, so this is about the repair mechanism, some of them. We talked about them. Let's see what the risk is, or is there a risk? So the repair mechanisms are activated and are controlled by the brain during the repair phase of the SBS, and they're aimed at repairing and healing an injured tissue. What they are not, the repair mechanisms are never an out-of-control process. This is the view of GNM. This is all controlled by the brain to complete a biological program. Even if there is pain or swelling or inflammation or bleeding or other such symptoms, these are temporary and only last throughout the repair phase. If one is not aware to this, if is not aware to the conflict shock, the DHS, and to the running of the biological program, the SPS, then the repair mechanism seems to be a malfunction of the body or of nature, and this leads to quite a bit of fear. Fear leads to stress. Stress hinders the repair phase. Fear also leads one to a medical doctor and to possible offensive diagnosis and troublesome treatment, which cause new conflicts or might cause new conflicts in many cases and will complicate and aggravate the situation considerably in most cases. So let's look at it. What impedes the repair mechanism? The repair process will lead to healing in the vast majority of cases, if not interfered with. Interference to the repair phase are stress, mainly stress caused from various reasons, and then offensive diagnosis and medication, most of which are causing a lot of stress to a person. And these procedures and treatment can, and in many times, oftentimes prolong, aggravate, stop, and lead to reoccurrence of the SBS, of the biological program, and reoccurrence of the repair phase, which is then called a chronic disease in regular medicine. There is a minority of cases where seizures, such as an heart attack or stroke or asthma attack, when occurring during the repair process, might be dangerous and even lethal, even fatal or lethal. Such cases are to be identified by a GNM therapist, and the repair phase must be pre-moderated to alleviate the expected seizure. And we have to recognize there are certain living conditions that complicate and aggravate the repair phase to the point of causing death. I'll talk about this now. So what are the aggravating, or the most common and most known aggravating conditions? One is called the syndrome. Fluid retention in the body when occurs concurrently with inflammation and edema anywhere in the body will aggravate the symptoms, causing considerable swelling and flooding in the area where the inflammation is. So the edema becomes much stronger or larger than it should have been in a regular repair phase. In GNM terms, this is the outcome of kidney collecting tubules syndrome, which we dub KCT or only the syndrome. And this occurrence massively reducing urination. So this is a sign. It's about 5% from normal urination, might be as little as 5% of normal urination. KCT can occur as a result of existential or abandonment and or refugee conflict, which lead one to feel like I'm a fish out of water, I was thrown out of my water, or was left alone in the desert. This kind of feeling. These conflicts are typically an outcome of war, crisis, and disaster situation. They are also commonly occurring due to hospitalization in hospital or when moving an aged person from his or her home into the elderly home. Several health conditions are a direct consequence of an active KCTS, for example, hepatomegaly, gout, large brain edema, what we see in the upper picture, and pleural effusion that flood the lung, one of the lung in the lower picture we can see, one of the lung space for breathing is reduced considerably due to pleural effusion, etc. The other aggravating condition is hunger. The repair mechanism consumes a lot of energy, and tissue would not be repaired correctly if nutrients are at scarce. For example, or two examples, proteins are at high demand when tuberculosis bacteria assist the repair. The bacteria is there in order to help breaking down tumors in the body, either identified or not. The cases where we have such bacteria and not enough proteins will be drawn from the lean body mass and will bring to cases such as you can see in the picture of emaciated person. Vitamin C is another such necessary component that is crucial for tissue rebuilt, and lack of it or lack of which in the repair phase leads to low-grade scurvy and to brittle tissues. So in this picture, we see a high-grade scurvy. This is a real shortage of vitamin C in the nutrition. And the girl develops a very brittle skin and bleeding gums and teeth falling and wounds in the skin are not closing, etc. This would have happened to sailors in long voyages in the sea in ancient times, and it happens when a village in the north, in the snowy north, is disconnected from supply for 9 months a year, every year, year after year, in the north of Europe, in North America, etc. Then we would see that kind of scurvy. But even so, when a person is in the repair phase and he doesn't have enough or more vitamin C than regularly, then his tissue might become brittle due to low vitamin C, and then any press of the on skin might cause, for example, a small hemorrhage underneath the skin, etc. Hence, a malnutrition person will have difficulty making it safely through the repair phase. Very important. And hunger, malnutrition, is the main cause which turn otherwise mild repair phase into a life-threatening disease. This is important to remember. Eat better when you are in repair phase. Famine or mass hunger is a prerequisite for existence of actual real epidemics, not like the one we're told we have in the last 2 years, but actual and real ones. And there is no epidemic-related mass death in well-nourished population. You wouldn't find this in the literature. It doesn't happen. And whenever you have, for example, measles epidemic, or we had in the history measles epidemic, it used to cause a lot of deaths because people were badly nourished. Nowadays, measles is a very light condition that goes away quite easily. Regardless of the causes of it, it goes away quite easily after some weeks of rash. Elderly people are malnourished in many cases due to various reasons, even in our society where there is enough food. I won't go into talking about this, but it's something that we have to pay attention. Many elderly people don't eat well. Okay, so that was the talking of the so-called hurdles of the repair phase. Should we fear it? It's a question that comes into mind. I say, do not fear, educate. First of all, try to relax. Do remember that the repair phase heals in almost all the cases. Actually, in life of every person, he goes through hundreds or thousands of repair phases, and he heals most of them. In most cases, the last one is fatal, but that's life. Also, do rest a lot. Vigorous activity leads to stress. Stress leads to no repair, as I said. Stress equals no repair. of the body. So whenever you are in vigorous activity, when your body signals you to lay down and rest, and you are in vigorous activity or in much activity, you're hindering or you're stopping your repair phase, and it all gets longer and longer. If there is symptoms reoccurrence, that indicates that tracks are in action. That is when the SBSs, due to tracks, SBS starts over and over again. So you are encountering the repair phase over and over again. It is important to locate those tracks and to reduce their impact. A GNM therapist should help you doing this. Nutrition during the repair phase. The idea, to my opinion, is the more the merrier. But most important are lots of protein, especially if there is night sweats and stinking pus. If you have this phenomena, both are quite good signs that TB bacteria are at activity in your body, and this is a good sign of repair phase. But you need a lot of protein because they consume much of it. And if you won't supply these proteins, then it will be taken from the lean mass of your body. You also might need ample minerals, especially when repairing bones, ligaments, joints, lymph and blood vessels. This requires quite a bit of minerals for the repair, especially bones. And a great source for minerals is a 2 days or 3 days cooked bone broth for those who eat this kind of well-nourishing soup. Vitamin C, as I mentioned, can help you do two things. First, it slows down the repair phase because it causes a bit of stress. So if you take much vitamin C, you will have some stress in your body, and this will slow down the symptoms of the repair phase. For this, you will pain and longing it a bit, but that's a way to work with it. And it facilitates the conduct of the repair phase in many cases, especially if the symptoms are hard to take. And it has a contribution of tissue building or better tissue building. So you have your tissue repaired better if you use more vitamin C. In case someone has fluid retention, as I said, an aggravating condition is the syndrome. Fluids are retained in the body. Salt baths, about 0.9% in the quantity of water, of salt, rock salt, or sea salt, not table salt, but the others with minerals. 3 times a day, layering it until urination starts, and do it again and again. This removes this signal to the body that everything is fine, and it can release fluids from the body. And feeling of home, feeling of being at home is very, very important, because as I mentioned, it's an existential or refugee conflict, which means I am not in my place, I am not in my sea, I am in the desert. Make the person feel at home. We have a problem, world, Houston. The current medical thinking holds a very confused view of what causes and the conduct of diseases. Most diseases, if you haven't noticed, most diseases are idiopathic, and which means it's of an unknown cause, unlike GNM, by the way. medicine has myriad theories and hypotheses about whatever disease there is, about cancer, about metastasis, about infectability, virality, vessel blockage, etc., 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 hypertension. All these are theories which are all extensively researched, yet poorly validated by what is mostly circumstantial evidences. And at the same time, they disregard contradictions to the its accepted theories. Okay, one such contradiction, for example, are illustrated in the picture on the right. This comes from a book describing a beautiful research done in 1956 to 63 by Giorgio Baroldi, an MD, and others, in which they filled hearts of dead people, of people who died, with latex, pumped it, and then removed the flesh from it. So they have this model of all the vessels within the heart. And what they show in this picture, let's look at it, is that even when a vessel is totally blocked, as where the arrow shows, the rest of the vessel, the continuation of the vessel, is fully filled with, in this case, latex, but in this real heart, it was filled with blood. And of course, if we look further, you see that the body has created bypass around this blockage before the blockage has occurred. And this is proved over and over again in medicine, in biological research, but nevertheless, medicine disregards it and continuing stunting people and bypassing hearts and making practically redundant, useless surgeries with people. Not nice. Yet most medical treatment derives from such hypothesis based on self-misleading "we are at war" paradigm of health. This happens mainly because medicine sees only symptoms. It sees it grouped into diseases, of course, but it's totally blind to the conflict, to the active phase, and to the conduct of the repair phase. They don't see the SBS at all. They don't see the conflict, and they have a problem understanding, and this leads to this confusement they have and to the problematic treatment that are developed in medicine. So this brings us to our mission, with our understanding at GNM. GNM practitioners are mostly aware to the fallacies of the current medical paradigm or paradigms and to the air treatment derived from it. We encounter it in everyday work with patients, and if they went through the regular medicine, then they're not in good shape in many cases. So we should be knowledgeable enough to explain all what I've talked about, not only to alleviate patients' fear, but also to educate the masses, the world. We should be able to show patients and the world that there is no infectability. Nothing infects us. No scientific trial have ever proved infectability. There is no virality. Look for Dr. Lanka work to see why there is no virality. There is no unintended, out of control cancerous growth. No viral cancer. Metastasis is a viral cancer for whatever it means. No autoimmunity. That is when the body immune system attacks the own body. This is not something that happens. There is reason to all that. There is no arterial obstruction causes heart attack, etc., etc. When viewed through the 5 biological laws of GNM, none of these mechanisms of sickness is needed to understand any and each disease situation. And then you can see that nothing in nature is sick, malignant, faulty, or abnormal, quoting Dr. Hammer himself. When understanding GNM, when you're educated in GNM, then we can see that this conflict shock and biological programs are instilled in us all life on Earth, to react to threats in the environment in which we were created, which is not the environment which we live today, human. The repair mechanisms are part of this reaction. They are meant to recover and heal the organism. Knowing this could help one to endure the inconvenience with less angst and to avoid damaging lethal treatments. Consented out of despair. Most people consent to those treatments because they don't know anything else. They have no alternative. We should communicate this to all mankind in order to present a real and viable alternative for all. Thank you. Despite my accent, I hope this message resonates with you, at least in part. Goodbye.